Bienvenidos a todos a esta nueva seña de la Universidad del Sentido. Welcome everyone to this new lecture of the University of Meaning. Benvenuti a tutti a questa nuova lezione dell'Università del Senso. Algunas breves indicaciones antes de empezar. Some brief indications before we start. Alcune brevi indicazioni prima di iniziare. La clase se tendrá en italiano, pero para todos los que lo deseen tenemos 3 canales habilitados de traducción simultánea. Para activar el audio, tienen que hacer clic en el icono que ven en la barra de abajo de su pantalla con el símbolo del mundo. The lecture will be held in Italian, but for all of those who wish, we have 3 simultaneous translations channels enabled. To activate the audio, you have to click on the world icon that you see in the bar at the bottom of your screen. La lezione sarà in italiano, quindi i nostri cari amici italiani in questa opportunità non avranno bisogno della traduzione simultanea. Va a haber un tiempo en la clase para responder preguntas. Todo aquel que durante la conversación quiera escribir algunas preguntas, podrá hacerlo seleccionando el icono de preguntas y respuestas en la barra inferior de la pantalla. Después, si quieren hacer la pregunta en vivo, tendrán que levantar la mano cuando inicie el momento de preguntas. There will be a time in class to answer questions. Anyone who wants to write some questions during the lecture can write them by selecting the questions and answer icon at the bottom of your screen. Then, if you want to ask the question live, just raise your hand when the questions and answer times begin. Ci sarà un momento durante la lezione per rispondere alle domande. Chi volesse scrivere le sue domande durante la lezione può farlo usando l'icono di domande e risposte che appare nella parte inferiore dello schermo. Quando inizieremo il momento delle domande e risposte, potete rivolgerlo al nostro insegnante dal vivo alzando la mano. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy. En instantes comenzaremos. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. We are about to start. Grazie a tutti per essere qui oggi. Stiamo per iniziare.
Where are you from?
Là-dessus.
Oui, bah c'est interdit. C'est tranquille ici, on n'a pas de problème.
Quel problème? C'est voici le 17 ans.
Siempre hemos tenido un buen entendimiento con las criaturas que viven más allá de nuestros límites. Nosotros no nos adentramos en su bosque y ellos no vienen a nuestro poblado.
Buongiorno e buonasera a tutti. Benvenuti al ciclo
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 8 Signs of University of Sense of Meaning. This will not be the place of the things that have already been said, but of the place where words call us to silence and call upon to listen to us. This will be good teachings, and this will give rise to a place to stay, because scholars does not dream the education of the future but of the origin. Sometimes it is enough to go back to the point of the beginning, first steps, to see the things that have already always been there, but with the surprise of the very first time. This makes us be human today. With us, somebody who lives this way, who stays, and when they allow us to grow and go in a different direction. The raw material of all these things is the word. Today with us, Professor Roberto Esposito, one of the best philosophers of our times, one who thinks about a time when thinking is revolutionary, and this way he thinks as to think as well. Today's community, is it possible after so much human history to think about the origin of a different kind of community? Professor, these days are a feast for Italians. For us, it is a feast, a party to have you here with us. We listen to you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to thank the University of Meaning, to all of you who are connected in this transmission. I want to thank Evelyn, Alessandra, Ezequiel. This is an experience that involves me, touches me, even, well, because of my old passion for Buenos Aires and for Argentina. But let's start with a first question. What is a community? When we pronounce this word, we will refer to the same thing. Are we going to refer to the same thing? Or as a community, we will understand different things and maybe incompatible things. 20 years ago, when I published my book about community, comunidad, I started with a question about the meaning, the original meaning of the term community, because back at that time, talking about this term, there was an overlap of different modes of thinking and different kinds of thinking, and quite difficult to be assigned or assimilate. As a community, we can understand different things. Human community as a whole that includes all men and women, or maybe a political broad community made up by so many states, as for example the European community, or also national community as the Italian one, the Argentinian one. But it is also possible to understand under this term smaller entities that coincide with a city, a town, or a group of people who are linked by something, some religion, ethnics, or a community could also be a room, a classroom, a group of ill people who need certain treatment, simply different individuals who share common interest. How can we orient ourselves in different situations and cases? How can we determine the term community with a shared meaning? How can we think, well, the general philosophers call this essence. The book I referred to, in order to refer to these questions, is, well, I found the origin of this word, starting with the term community. Comunità is the original word, community in English. But this passage through the etymology or the different shades of the language that calls upon the attention of something This has to do with some indications and some surprises. In front of my eyes, this has opened up a meaning. When we pronounce the word community today, it seems to something gets lost. It got lost. And this loss of meaning or significance is the need to go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the Latin name community made up of two parts. Cum, a gift, and munity would be those who make up a community based on the original etymology, got lost throughout the time, shares a common aspect. They are linked by the same muns. What does this mean? This muns term mean? This is the core and the sense of community. If we look up the word in Latin dictionaries, we can see how muns has different meanings. On the one hand, this indicates a new law, a new skill, something that has to be followed, and on the other hand, it's a present, a gift. If we link these two meanings, we get the sense of the meaning, the global sense of the term, that is the law of a gift, of a commitment, of taking care of others. And based on this etymology, the Latin etymology, community is a group of people who share one same obligation, or giving or taking care, a reciprocal, a two-way care. This is something that separates from the meaning that, well, the term has assumed in the modern languages. Today, the idea of reciprocal gift or present has not been removed, but substituted by its opposite or apparent opposite. Today, we are used to seeing in the community more than a law of reciprocal equity. We mainly see an interest or a common property. So much so that the term community is more and more related to the idea of belonging. And this is part of a community. Those who belong, and this is the way we consider it today, those who belong to the same ethnic, cultural language make up a community. And this is how many times this opposes to those things that do not belong to a group. So this is how, if we had checked or verified a semantic drawback as to the original term. But this new term makes reference to an attention when faced with others. Now we tend to link something that is of our own, that belongs to us, something we belong to. So more than a community for others has become the community of our own. The core of the center of the expression of community is something that calls to a living together, to co-living, something that has to do with a group of people that different from all the rest, which is not part of that group. What at the beginning was an open term, exclusive term, today it has become exclusive and excluding at the same time. If we have a look at the vocabulary and the dictionary, we see that the common term is the contrary to the term that we mentioned. Something that belonging to everybody does not belong to everybody. So if we play with this pun on words throughout the time, is, well, the communities is defined by the contrary, by what is our own. So community, in the meaning that the term has taken, is the property of something that we share with those who also have it, different from those who are excluded. So in this way, we have a change in meaning. Community becomes something that, instead of making reference to the usefulness and relationship with others, makes reference to the identity and relationship with the same that has to go to a threshold that separates whatever is ours from what is not ours. So whatever is isolated, or those who are excluded, well, this term of community is transferred to a horizon of inclusion, of a common horizon, of the horizon of exclusion. It does not have to do with the idea of a bridge, but the idea of the metaphor of our own, the meaning that, well, common is exclusive. It is not shared with others. This is the prevailing sense or the meaning that the term has taken today. In this orientation of the American thinking that we call communitarism. And based on that, the community seems to be closed and separate, that closes in itself based on a certain identity, cultural and linguistic identity, contrasting those who are not part of that because they belong to a different community, or maybe because simply they don't have any community at all. This is a change in meaning, a semantic passage that can be rebuilt better if we go back to a different vocabulary that is also originated by this term muse. But instead of positive or affirmative terms, in this case it's a negative term. I am talking about the Latin word, which is the opposite to communitas. This means immunitas. This word in the modern literature, this is considered as the contrary against community or communitas. If communitas is that links or bonds the individuals in commitment, unitas, immunitas, on the other hand, is what releases them or relieves them from this burden. It relieves men from the law of reciprocal care. As a community in the original sense, this makes reference to a common condition that has to do with men and women. Immunity or immunization, on the other hand, makes reference to the privilege of the specific situation of those who are extracted from this common situation, having certain benefits. This is known in the legal profile based on which we know that this is given by parliamentary immunity, diplomatic immunity, those who are not subject to the law where all other citizens are related to. But this meaning that can be recognized in the exception ideological idea of the term immunity, well, related to whether natural or induced immunity implies the capacity of a certain body or organ to subtract by means of its antibodies from an infection, which can be transmitted. And today, unfortunately, this is a current topic in this pandemic that we are going through today. So if we overlap these two meanings, the legal meaning and the other meaning, what comes out is that the immunity or immunity device makes up some kind of barrier, defensive barrier against whoever threatens the prerogatives of a subject, individual or collective, because the communities that are considered as individuals in broader dimensions can be immunized. And precisely this is what is happening for some time, right in front of our eyes, when everybody in the peripherals of the world, in the ghettos, for example, or metropolis, the communities get enclosed to protect from the transmission by external elements who want to integrate, or in front of internal elements considered as a contaminant or polluting. Of course, it has not always been this way. Political communities have not always enclosed themselves to avoid some bad transmission, but this happened many times in old and recent times, where that ended in the Nazis' Germany, where the Jews were seen as germs, contaminating germs that had to be immunized, destroying. Well, this was a special case, but this is what may happen whenever a social group, ethnic group, or religious group is seen a potential for this. Exactly to this possible and many times real immunization. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the loss of community. Today we live a loss of a community, a transformation in immunity. If we remember that, well, it was said the concept of immunitas is opposite to communitas, then we can understand that how immunization of community that makes up some kind of escape from the community itself, and this is changed. I have the feeling that today there's multiple causes. We are facing a huge growth of immunity devices compared to the past. This phenomenon has to do with the legal environments, not only with that, and this extended progressively to all the sectors. The language of our life transforms into the point of coagulation, real and symbolic, of the contemporary experience. Of course, each and every society has expressed comprehensively a requirement of self-protection as to the dangers that were coming from inside and outside. This applies to individuals and society. No body, individual or collective, could resist without the immunity subsystem that protects from environmental attacks. For example, the right of the police, this makes us to immunity subsystems of the society and also the state. This is an immunity state of the society, and without them, society would not be able to survive to all the entities that threaten them. Well, the society would crumble down in case of conflicts. But here, so my feeling is that today, at the end of now in modern times, is to understand that the term has transformed into real effective practice, imaginary practice, and society. Just to have an idea, it is enough to have a look at the place that immunology science took the place, not under prophylactic and medical focus, but under the social, legal, and the information roles. It is important to prevent excessive circulation of potential transmission. From this point of view, the virus has become the metaphor. This is the well, and never like in these months, there has been a time in our society, in the Western society at least, where the fear, the biological fear, attenuated. I mean, in the 50s and the 60s, in the 1900s, when the idea of antibiotic medicine would eradicate some diseases, and this was promoted all over the place. And the pandemics then, the idea came, and the HIV came, and the psychological platform came down. and real virus became something invincible, and they are now capable of dragging us down. So these communities grew until they became, and immunity became our essential concern. The form that we're giving to or shaping to our lives is our form of life, form of living. Today, pandemics, coronavirus, COVID-19 has this immunity syndrome, takes it to a certain limit. This can be understood today in the need of defense that each of us has, and this can be understood when we see the aggressiveness which has not been overcome. But immunization and the immunity device has turned into the central character of our societies, the central characteristic. For example, let's think about the huge figures that governments have invested to protect the limits, the boundaries, and the communication systems from those viruses that could come in an illegal way. But let's also think about the protection that surrounds those who deal with political activities or diplomat economic activities. I mean, the constant growth of immunity apparatus, of the concession of immunity in a period in which security is the dominating concern. We live, as we know, in a society where it's a security or secured society. So we anywhere can see whatever surrounds us, whatever happens out there in the world, from the social to political world, the political to the technological world. The idea of immunity was given in everything. What is important is to fight against any means the transmission, real and apparent transmission, effective and symbolic transmission. Where this may come, we know that what characterizes the modern man is the fear to be touched, to be affected. The time, the moment when this contact is understood as whatever puts our identity in danger, whatever puts the borders of our bodies puts in danger. We know the experience of an ill being or of a feeling badly that we experience when, for example, on a bus, we feel somebody's touching us, a bodily touch. So we go one step behind. We just to get further away from this context. And then when we go from the individual field to the collective field, well, this demand of a lot of protection has generalized increasingly more until it came to characterize all our political class. In fact, we can say that this immunity enclosure characterizes all the countries in the world, not only the European countries, also the US and other countries, large countries, small countries. Where is this trend originated, we can ask? I believe that this has to do with a counterproducing effect, like a rebound effect, like a rejection effect of the globalization processes. Because the more the world tends to become global, to go global, it tries to open up more borders to the circulation of people, objects, goods, and this produces even more fear to lose our own identity. So the attempt, the strong attempt, was to reconstruct it by getting enclosed. We can say that it was the drop of the symbolic Berlin Wall at the end of last century that produced this action of going back and making up small walls until we transformed the community into a kind of fortress, surrounded fortress, new nationalism, for example, the countries of the ex or former Soviet bloc or former Yugoslavia. Well, they are, there's some connection, there's a strong connection between globalization and immunization. And once we describe this change, we will ask a second question, more important question. Where can this lead us? Where can this take us? My feeling is that this immunity syndrome that has taken us all and is doomed to change the communitas or communities in each place implies more problems to solve, because whatever is presented as a solution, this exasperated trend to immunoprotection, to self-protection in Italy, determines problems which are not minor problems, because immunity that is necessary to protect our life, if we take it beyond certain boundary or certain limit, will end up affecting. Immunity is a negation, a denial. It takes life to some kind of jail where not only freedom is lost, but also the last sense of our collective existence. This means going to the existence, individual existence, as existence, outside means the opening, going outwards, the implicit activity in the original idea of communitas. This is the essential part of human experience. And this is the contradiction on which we have to put our attention. Whatever protects our individual and social body beyond a certain point is what will prevent us from avoid developing. This contradiction is contained in the same logic in the procedure of a medical immunity, because we know that a vaccine for a patient in case of a disease, this means inputting a little fragment of that disease in the body of that patient. And we know that this is a fragment that can be controlled, that will prevent the disease in the future. But in this way, this comes from a double meaning of the term, Greek term pharmako, that at the same time means disease and medicine at the same time, a remedy. The treatment is also made up with the same matter of the evil, because it's both medicine and poison, as if we had to try or test some point of poison to cure. This does not mean that we should not have the vaccine. Of course, we have to, especially at this time, at this moment. But with the logic of immunization, this implies this negative element, this passage from negative to positive. So if we take this immunity practice to the social body, we can observe the same contradiction, the same paradox, raising the level of attention of the society when faced with this risk, the way we are used to doing. This means blocking the growth of society, even making it go to an initial stage. It's like if we, in order to adapt the level of protection and the identity of the risk, if we had to adapt the perception of the risk to the growing demand of protection, if we created an artificial risk to be able to control it, it would be something like that. And the rest is what insurance companies do, right? In order to make the earnings grow, they raise the level of risk. Some insurance companies have their interest to increase their risk. I live in Napoli, and as you know, well, the risk of stealing cars or car robbery is very, very high. So this produces some growth of the insurance. Some people suspect that it's the insurance companies the ones that steal the cars that rob but this is hypothesis only. Of course, insurance campaigns are interested in empowering these vicious cycles of risk and protection. Higher risk, higher protection, and higher is the earning, the profit. And this short circuit between risk and fear is what is taking us to make this change come true, the original idea of community. I have the feeling that we are touching a point or a threshold that is, well, in this reciprocal load between protection and danger or imaginary danger, we are running the risk of having the whole social system to collapse. We know today that with the pandemics, everything should change. Many things should change. Well, in short, this risk is ahead of us still today. Just to have an idea of the adverse effect of a community practice, let's think about what happens with the self-immune diseases. When the immunity system is so strong, this goes against the body that it should defend under the risk or with the risk of destroying it. Immunity is necessary, but when they grow as a measure, they can also produce very serious damage to the body instead of defending it. So, as regards these dynamics, these self-aggressive dynamics, that is felt, perceived from different points of view, we understand there's a need of going back to the original community. As I said, as Ezequiel said at the beginning, there's a strong relationship between origin and present time. Only the origin will give light to the present time. So there's a need to go back to what it originally meant, the community meant. But how should we determine the conditions of this going back? How can we get out of the vicious cycle that or circle that I described? The idea, well, is to change the relationship between community and immunity, putting in the center the community in the most open and inclusive form, and together separate the immunity protection, which is necessary, and as we have said, nobody could live without immunity devices, but we have to separate the protection, the function of the protection from the self-immune syndrome, let's say, of the excluding power of some devices, immunity devices or artifacts. In order to get to this, or to come to this conclusion, to this idea, we should think about the immunity system differently. We should think that instead of thinking about these barriers, excluding barriers as filters between internal and external relationship, the term does not mean exclude, but differentiate it between positive and negative elements. The rest, also medicine and transplant, has to do with accepting external bodies. This means that through the immunity system, this takes place as well. Even when a woman is pregnant, during pregnancy, the immunity system of the woman supports carries within her a foreign body, an external body, and this is something that goes back to reflection. Many times Massimo Recalcati mentions this. How can we apply this positive logic within the social systems? How can we find a point of articulation, positive articulation between communitas and immunitas? Or which instruments? Well, I think, and I'm coming to the conclusion now, that the problem has to be faced or tackled in two fronts. For example, the deactivation of the negative immunization devices or apparatuses, and on the other hand, the activation of new common spaces. Let's start with the first point, okay? We have seen how the growth of the control and exclusion devices or artifacts determine a decrease of individual freedom and this sharing that gathers us all, ideas, languages, information, and this makes up different forms of reduction, not only of freedom, but of impoverishing of the common experience. Naturally, we can distinguishing between protection devices and how to say this, as exclusion devices, it is difficult. Well, let's think about the control measures in different airports or stations, or maybe different places. They are, well, this somehow may be a body of control and vigilance and exclusion. So it would be necessary to find the way to discriminate between prevision and control devices and these devices of suggestion or holding devices. This means that our experience is safe and secure, but at the same time inclusive, open, available. But this is not enough. This is the negative side. Then we have to add a positive side. I mean, apart from solving or dissolving immunity bonds or links, we have to create dimensions of a common life. Some time ago, philosophers and legal people started working on the concept of a common living, of the common good. So far, until now, this was flattened between the private and public good, the good of the individual and the good of the state, because the right that is the law that is originated in Rome and then it goes to the modern society tends to take exactly everything to a proprietary look of individuals or the state. In this way, what does not belong to the individual or the state is reduced. And when there is some intensification of the sense, this redimension or this dimension is more integrated. I mean, immunity progressively has to do with all the environment of the public and private sphere or arena. The idea of life, of processes, biopolitical processes, intelligence, environmental resources, water, the earth, streets, the land, spaces for communication, everything tends to be privatized based on modernity, modern times, the invention of the state, a form of reduction of what is common to everybody, of the common. However, what should be done, on the other hand, should be replaced to replace the model of property, the proprietary model. This should be the model of luxury. No, I don't mean what is being used. I mean, to be used, I mean, the idea of usage has to be something that is not totally replaced but putting next to the category of property. Using does not mean to hold our own things, but using it but so that others can use it as well. And the conflicts that arise in the whole world about privatization of water or the energy sources or patents of different inventions and the pharmaceutical industries. Let's think about the battles that arise as to the COVID vaccines. All this is going in the direction of a clash against proprietary interests, a crash, and there should be a battle is open. Politics is also made by limits, boundaries, problems of forms which are not legal bylaws, but a mental mind way of thinking what is common, the model of the common. It is not either public nor private. This is something that is unknown. The common good is unknown and it's refractory as to our conceptual categories. All of them are busy, all of them are taken, considering immunity devices. However, the idea of returning, going back to the community, considers this possibility, the capacity before operating and thinking, going back to the origin of community and community as the original good. Thank you very much. I would like to stop here now.
Aprovechamos para contarles sobre todo, bueno, al mundo de habla hispana. Veo que hay muchas preguntas escritas en español. Contarles que van a poder pasar levantando la mano, alzando la mano, van a poder pasar a hacer la pregunta directamente al profesor Roberto Esposito. Así que recuerden, alzando la mano vamos a tener la posibilidad de hacer venir a algunos de ustedes a poder preguntarle directamente a Esposito la pregunta, porque leer seguramente leamos una o dos, en cambio presencialmente van a poder hacer
questions in person.
otras,
So I see
varias.
Luca,
Así
Giselle,
que veo a Luca, Giselle,
Alejandra, Jessica,
Alejandra,
and I would like to
Jessica,
invite you to raise your
y los
hand
invito a
to come
levantar
on
la
this
mano
side and
para
ask the
pasar a
question.
hacer su pregunta.
Roberto. So let's start with a question, a written question. I will translate for you, and then we will invite somebody so that they ask the question directly face to face. So there's somebody who asked, the obligation today does not have a nice image, has a bad press. How can we go back and present in the current culture? How can we make a difference between obligation and freedom? What would be the relationship between obligation and freedom? How can we present this in a culture like this, in a current culture? Well, I believe that the notion of freedom has a very strong importance, so as to quote it, but also the idea of obligation also has an essential importance, I think. A thinker quite like Simone Weil, well, she says that it is necessary to look at society not so much from the point of view of the rights of whatever corresponds, but from the point of view of obligation. For example, everything related to immigration in Italy, well, people speak a lot about that, but I imagine about this, but I imagine in your places also. We have to focus this not only so much from the point of view of what are the rights of immigrants to come in. This is a complex issue. We have to see it from the point of view of our obligation to receive them, because only in this way, if we see it from the obligation point of view, well, this gets away from the immunity dynamics, from the rights. The rights, as I said before, This is an immunity system, as Newman said before me, because in order to define a right, we have to imagine that somebody might not have this right. Only in this way will I realize that I have a right, a certain right. However, how can we say the right or the whatever we must do, as Simone Weil says, if there was only one person in the world who that person would not have any right, because this would not mean anything, but it would have obligations with themselves and with him or herself. So obligation and freedom, oppositely to what may think, these are two notions, two ideas that are linked together and related together. Thank you, Roberto. Now, let's remind you that if you raise your hand, you can come and ask your questions. I will ask you to ask a question and not a comment or a reflection or give your opinion, not a thought. Especially today, I will be translating this into Italian. And I'm not a translator myself, so the short, the better. A direct question, simple question, so that we can transmit it to Roberto. Roberto, how do you think the community should act when faced with those members who exercise violence? What are the limits? I mean, if communities have to defend against those who exercise violence, those who are against them themselves, well, I believe that the limit of freedom is the limit of not acting negatively on the freedom of others. If this was the case, communities cannot allow this. They cannot allow this. When I say that immunity systems are necessary, as long as they don't go through beyond a certain threshold or limit, well, the state, the police are there as well, and they have a monopoly of a legitimate violence. And this legitimate force is what has to defend community from violence. Naturally, if later this legitimate force transforms into a legitimate violence, as recently happened in the United States specifically, where the police exercises this absolutely unproportioned violence and many times directed to specific ethnias, well, the state loses legitimacy or legitimacy. Naturally, outside this role of the state, of keeping rule, law, and order, there's only just reciprocal violence that remains, the highest, worst evil. As Hobbes said, the only way to get out of the natural state of reciprocal violence is a common agreement. Usually this common pact agreement has to be unlimited and proportional. Otherwise, the state itself would become the expression of violence itself. I don't know if I answered to the question. It's a difficult question when the question of violence is involved and response to violence, but we have to be to have courage to give an answer. Of course, we have to look for the limits. Then, okay, now we have Marina Mendez. Marina, good morning. Hello, Roberto. And congratulations for the presentation. My question is not difficult, I believe. And you're saying that immunity system is risking destroying the body from defining itself. This dynamic requires to go back to the origin and to light. How can we separate the protection from the immunity system by filtering without excluding anybody, without blocking anybody, without any divisions? Because I was really affected by the example of the mother who protects and guarantees life to at that time foreign being, they're together. Yes, Marina, thank you very much for your question. Precisely as we know, during pregnancy, the mother defends her baby. Even the more this baby has an immunity, different immunity system, different from her system, maybe because it's her father's or his father's. This is a metaphor of a great significance, the protection of whatever is foreign. How can we differentiate logic, immunity logic of protection from the logic, immunity project of it that is excluding? I believe that if we work around the notion of the limit, a boundary, I mean the limit, the borders are necessary for human beings. Also, to think, we have to always think as to a possible contrasting point. The negative is necessary. As Hegel said, we cannot imagine an existence or a life that as if life was absolutely unlimited. But the limit and the borders are good as long as it is not absolute. As in Italian, it said it's porous, it has pores. That means that as a sponge allows to filter other things and let part of the others come in. If the limit is a wall, an iron wall, a stone wall, will not be nobody will be able to go through it. But if we think about the limit as a tissue, as a fabric, or something that can penetrate, so this limit can be gone through. So the immunity system must be conceived in this way. On the other hand, the immunity system in our body has a function that is called immunity tolerance. And the transplant of external bodies, precisely, well, this is allowed through this tolerance, immunity tolerance device. So we can say that immunity system, when it works well, this allows to receive a transplant. On the other hand, when the immunity system is ill, is diseased, it will immediately reject the transplanted body, the new body or organ, and we go back to this excluding immunity. Eugenio, good morning. We listen to you. Okay, after listening to you, I was thinking about the current states and the current conditions and democracy as the current states and the way it has been built till the present time. And the question will be, what kind of transformations should there be precisely in the current states as to the organization of the states and the democracies as you can live and see in most
para poder, digamos, dar lugar a este sentido de comunidad, digamos, más abierto y más integrado, digamos, conviviendo con la globalización, pero recuperando también las identidades, lo local, etc.
Thank you, Eugenio. I agree. We need to find a meeting point, a crossing road between globalization and identity. Now, well, it has the form of a state. So I believe that a society, a world that is divided, an opposite world cannot resist, cannot persist. Well, the pandemics is even showing this. On the one hand, the state limits are not enough, For example, when faced with a virus, and on the other hand, same as all defenses when faced with the virus and looking for a vaccine, they have to be done in a common way. Not just one state can achieve this. So globalization is something we cannot go back from. We cannot go backwards. But on the other hand, there could never be a fully globalized world without any internal limitations, without internal identities, because this would be a world that is fully globalized. This would be given away to the economy because the financial goal is what loves the global thing, or technology and economy are, let's understand this, are good for global, but this is limited by politics. And politics also need. I'm not talking about relationship between identities, organizations, state organizations, communities, such as the ones to give the inhabitants their identity. Contemporary philosophy, especially in the last decades, well, the concept of identity was kind of attacked. And when identity transforms into ethnic and cultural identity that is excluding, it has to be disassembled, dismantled. And we have to think that in order for a difference to exist, in order for us to speak about difference, we should also need identity. There cannot be differences if there's no identities. In logic, philosophy, the concept of difference and equity is not excluded. They are complementary. So if we transfer this same concept that I am mentioning to the political arena. Also, in this case, it is necessary to have a globalized world where differences do not disappear. These are easy formulas to say, but difficult to perform. But in short, I live in Europe, and Europe, in the European Union, it is important to be able to go forward when we conceive this as a differentiating unit without abolishing unity or differences. Thank you, Roberto.
Abbiamo
we
Veronica.
have Veronica.
Veronica,
Good
buen
morning.
día. Te pedimos si podés encender mi cámara,
Please
encender el micrófono
so that we can listen
para
to your
poder escuchar
question.
tu pregunta.
Good morning. My question
Mi
has
pregunta
to
iba
do with
relacionada a la
something
que
that
ya
you
se
have
acaba de
just
contestar,
answered. We
porque
are
estamos
also
trabajando
working here
también
in
aquí
South
en
America
América del Sur
about
el tema del
state
Estado y
and
la
the
incorporación
incorporation of
de
the
las
different
propuestas de buen
proposals
vivir
and the proposals
y
as
las
to
propuestas en
the
cuanto a
rights
derecho
of
también de
community
la
and how
comunidad
to
y
bring
cómo traer
this
esto
to
a
the
nivel de
different
constitución de
countries.
países.
We
Entonces
are
va
working
relacionado porque
a
estamos trabajando
lot
mucho también
on
desde
community
las autonomías
autonomies from the
comunitarias
different
y desde las
communities,
comunidades
ancestral,
ancestrales de
originary
los pueblos
communities, this
originarios,
idea of
ese sentido de
communitas
comunidad para retomar
as part of
dentro
the
de las
Constitution.
constituciones.
So my
Entonces iba
question refers
vinculada
to
a la
the
pregunta
previous
anterior,
question, but
pero ya
mainly
se ha
has been
respondido
answered.
en mayor parte, ¿no?
Mainly.
Dove Veronica ci sono tante comunità originarie che poi sono sempre vicino e sempre più vicino alle grandi città più
He's translating the question.
allo stile occidentale. Quindi ogni volta più vicino voglio dire perché crescono.
There are communities that are closer to the Western civilization. One seems to eat the other. They seem to confuse one another. Veronica says, my question is similar to the one before, but how can we think about these original communities, about the identity when they start having contact with globalization? Is there anybody who wins? Is there anybody who loses? If identity is your alterity, your other, the otherness, what is the idea of equality and globalization, or the idea of the communities that you mentioned? Well, I have partially answered in the previous question, but I would like to add something. we are faced with a big change, partly produced by coronavirus. What I mean is I am convinced that we will assist to a reverse process, different from the one, or reverse from the one that took communities and people to enclose themselves, or to come closer to Buenos Aires, maybe, or to large cities. And I suppose that Buenos Aires is a city of 15 or 20 million inhabitants. So this process of concentration in the cities will, in my opinion, will get away and go to local communities. The ideas that we are experiencing, working on smart working or remote home office, will make it possible to work even from home, no matter where you are. At least here in Europe, we are experiencing this. Those who work in London, in Messina, and Sicily, a region in Sicily, they are working in a company, for example, or working on communications, or a company of any other kind. They can work from Messina, or they can work from a different close point in London without needing to be in London. There's constant research now on different towns, peoples in fields, because internet allows us not to be all together in a big crowd in the cities. Let's understand this. Cities have a symbolic and a material importance, extraordinary importance, historical importance. Modern society was made by the cities themselves. So personally, I am closely related to the cities. I will never go and live in the outskirts of the city because I need the city. Having said this, younger generations feel attracted by the smaller communities away from the cities, because you can live better, because there's no congestions or traffic jams. Naturally, these are phenomena that have to be relaunched and balanced as well. You cannot go from all city to no city at all, but probably the organization, a future organization of work organization, will allow better balance between local communities and global cities. I have this feeling, but I may be wrong, and we will see this in the coming years. Kenai Avila. Can I please unmute yourself? Thank you very much for being with us. And, well, my question is, many times a community is divided by an opinion. What is better? To try to link that community back? How can you do it in that case, or let the community get divided? He's translating the question now. In this case, is it better to think about the community with these differences, divisions, or should we try to link them to bond what has been, to bring back what was divided? That is the question. Well, it depends on the type of division. If the division, the split, implies a difference of ideas, of point of view, or cultures, I think this has to be respected, because it's especially because it's a vital element. The communities have several points of view that compete. Somehow they compete and they help the community. But if the division, on the other hand, means a real conflict, then that can even destroy the community, well, we have to see that the division is a difference and not a conflict. This is an important point. but the difference is important. I don't trust those topics that talk about the people, that people as unique one and united people. And I see that I am touching a delicate point for Argentina, especially. But this is a point that Argentina has a long story in Argentina about this, and I feel respectful and a special sensitivity about that. But the mythology of the idea of the linked people who answer the same way to everything has a totalitarian effect, because the whole united people that identifies in just one idea or just one boss, this may have a function of an important social union, but this has to be under control. It should never go against the existence of differences, because differences are the blood of a society. If the differences are not kept, unless we're talking about conflicts, for example, a war conflict, but differences are necessary. So unity, the togetherness, has to be kept in a dialectic relationships, considering the differences, the same as relationship between global and local. Thank you, Roberto. Last question we have with us Alejandro Lambert. Professor, how can we exorcise the fear in the societies that they feel that in the underground of all these antinomies, immunity and community, exist or lie? Alejandro, thank you very much. Well, see, fear cannot be exorcised, and you cannot exorcise anxiety. This is what we experience. Anxiety can be managed, can be dominated or controlled, but it cannot be eliminated. Fear, and we need to make a differentiation here. There's a negative fear that is terror, this fear that blocks, that makes you lose your reasoning. And there's also a positive fear that makes you stop your hand if you are about to touch fire, and it makes you use your reasoning. I think we should not eliminate fear, but control or manage that fear, assuming, how can I say this, the positive fear, that is the one that makes us reason or think and behave in a certain way, in a good way. We have to differentiate it from a negative imaginary fear that has led us to or induced us in case of a foreigner. For example, fear when faced with a virus is the need to have the right conversation. It's a positive fear. But if we are told that a virus is brought by people who come from outside, well, this fear has to be managed, ruled, governed, and has to be modified. Roberto, this would be the closure, but we have one of our parents who came to ask a question. If you allow this, we will ask the last question. Jose, welcome. Thank you very much.
Gracias, muchas gracias, Roberto. Buonasera. La pregunta es, teniendo en cuenta el mundo que vivimos y sobre todo el mundo virtual, ¿cómo te imaginas esta vida y la construcción de la comunidad en un mundo virtual? ¿Y cómo te imaginas la amenaza de la inmunidad en el mundo virtual?
Yes, I understood, and thank you, Jose. Yes, it is a lot is said about this topic of the virtual thing, as for example, the way in which we are organizing this meeting in a virtual way. This implies probably opportunities and resources. I wouldn't have been able to fly to Buenos Aires and we wouldn't have met. But this also implies a strong risk. It implies a strong risk precisely because there should never be a virtual community only. I'm a teacher myself, so imagining a class of students, of virtual students only, would be an impoverishing, huge impoverishing of teaching, of formation, of training because of the community spirit. I usually teach in a school in Pisa where students live there together with the professors. This is a determining concept or effect that gives you the possibility to eat together, to chat, to touch each other, to be in contact. Right now, this is not possible. The virtual field is helping us in this kind of problem, but this is something that we will keep using even afterwards because of the resources. For example, international conferences, but it will never replace or totally substitute the contact of the real effective community. Thank you, Roberto. Now we will invite everybody to repeat one of our rituals that we create in this community called Scholas. And this has to do with the question, what has happened to you? What have you felt in a world of total equality where apparently information is the same for all? And the way to understand that is just one. Maybe experience makes us go back to that place where each person is different, where one is unique. The experience, a special experience. And this is a question of the difference, the question of the experience. Right here, down below at the bottom of the screen in the chat, we have the possibility to get into a link. We have this link that will take us to some kind of wall where we can type what happens. What has happened to you? We don't want information, reflections, or thoughts. We want your feelings. The feelings that arose by listening to Roberto Esposito. So now we will listen to a soft music for 5 minutes, and we will give you 5 minutes for you to write. You can come in and listen. We will listen to his music and read them later.
sensación de estar siendo parte de la possibilità di hacer un mundo para todos. La sensazione di essere parte di un nuovo mondo per tutti. Esta seña me enrostró amorosamente. Comunitas, la necesidad de que nos vincule.
Communitas is what relates us, not what connects us simply. Link or bond is to know in the otherness. Thank you very much for your class, Professor Esposito.
Vínculo es conocerse en la
I
alteridad.
miss the idea of living in community,
Gracias por la
living
clase, profesor
connected with
Esposito.
others.
Extraño vivir en comunidad. Vivir conectada con los otros. Tuve la sensación
that we can generate
de que podemos generar comunidades
where
donde las diferencias se puedan alojar.
Posted. Communities where we
donde
learn
aprendamos unos de otros.
one from the others.
Desafío de poder rescatar,
Challenges
desafío
of
de
being
poder
able to
rescatar
rescue the
el originario
meaning of
significado de
community.
comunidad.
Let's not
No dejemos que pierda el
let
sentido y la
the
presencia del
sense and the
otro.
presence of ours get
Si
lost.
sucediera,
If this happens, we
empezamos a
will
morir
start
un poco.
dying gradually.
Caro Roberto Esposito,
Dear
tante
Roberto
grazie
Esposito,
per
thank
essere
you
qui con noi in queste date che
much
sappiamo per l'Italia
for having
sono date
been
un po'
here with
sacre.
us in these dates that we know in Italy they are
veramente
sacred,
grazie di
holy.
cuore.
So thank you very much from
Per
our
finire
hearts.
vogliamo lasciare la parola
And
a
just
te.
to finish, we would like to give the floor, the word to you. Yes, I am the one who wants to thank you. Even this very last part, I found it really very beautiful, really nice, and I read the word nostalgia, so I will have some nostalgia. I find this gathering very special because of one aspect, because the topic of the gathering, of getting together, is one with the gathering itself. We have talked about community, but for 2 hours, we have formed a community ourselves in the form of sharing, of having shared some topics and the feelings of some topics and the differences of different diversities of opinion. A community should be a porous way, the one that we have tried to create. Together, there's a plural together, because there are many us, and singular, a community that is made up of so many points that cross, and they have intentions, affections, intelligence that are common. So I want to thank you all, and I hope we can get together again.